Hey you guys, and welcome back to Monetization May. I'm super excited for Trading 2, where we're going to talk about 5 questions that you can ask to get to develop your story idea and get clear on it, right? So these are great. These are questions that I'm currently asking myself to develop the sequel in the book that I just wrote, because it's going to be a duology, and these are generally the questions that I ask when I'm trying to get clear on a new book idea. And like I mentioned in the previous training I did, I've written 11 books at this point. I've had to do these back-to-back to meet deadlines over and over the past couple of years, and so I really haven't had time to kind of sit and let an idea develop in my brain. I've really had to get to it and be like, okay, I need to figure out what's going on in this book so I can get started. And so these questions are going to be really helpful for you if you're trying to get started, if you're just trying to get clear enough to figure out where the story starts, or if you're really trying to develop your outline and you're just not sure like how to get that down. So let's dive into these 5 questions. Okay, so the first one's pretty obvious. It is, who is your main character and why are they telling the story? And I think this is really important because if you watched my other training, you'll know that I didn't realize my book had 2 protagonists until I got like halfway through. And so if you ask yourself this question up front, you can kind of look at it from all angles and go, okay, well, why is this person my main character? Does this make sense for where the story needs to go? Does there need to be another protagonist? Like, I remember when I was writing my Starlight Chronicles series and I would introduce a new protagonist every book, I had to think about who's this guy gonna, or like who's this person gonna be? Why am I picking this person? What do they bring to the story? Why is their story important? What's their character arc like? And there were so many good characters I could have potentially told the story from, but it really had to make sense for like where the story was going to end up in the overall arc of the series, right? And so that was just something to really consider there. And then this will also help you because it'll help you to understand the story and the motives, right? So if you pick a character, obviously that character needs to have reason to take part in a story and the plot. And so it helps you to figure out what's going on with them? Why would they want to take part? What do they desire to have? Or what do they stand to lose? And why is that interesting for the reader? And like, I know that this is really good, this really good story about the author of the Sailor Moon series. When she was writing the manga at first, her first original main character was Sailor Venus, but she had a code name Sailor V. And that was her original protagonist, and she thought, this makes sense, this is who my main character's going to be. And it wasn't until she got a little way through that she realized, no, you know what, my main character's meant to be Sailor Moon. And she had to switch the story, and what ended up happening is that Sailor Venus became a spin-off series, and she started a new series centered on Sailor Moon, and it's like now global phenomenon, everyone knows about it. Low-key my favorite anime of all time, but we don't need to talk about that. So basically, it's just really interesting how sometimes we start with a protagonist and we think they're a great fit, but then we realize there's a better protagonist, or sometimes we realize there's a second protagonist. But if you ask yourself this question up front, it can help to minimize you having to go through that process of realizing who your real protagonist is. So I would really encourage you to get clear on who are you picking, why are you picking them, why does it make sense, what's their story like, where is it going to go, what's their motives, who do they have relationships with, and how does that serve the story? Do they serve as good side characters, or do they serve better as a co-protagonist? And figure out those questions up front, and that's going to help you know what you're actually writing about and who it's going to be from, right? Okay, the second question is, what needs to happen in your story? And this is a really good one. So basically, if you're trying to figure out the outline from scratch, and you're really not sure like how to begin, just start by figuring out, what do I know needs to happen? And I can give you an example. I've got a few here. So basically, I know that in my sequel, after having written the first book, that there's some questions I need to answer about the plot. And so I've started there. I know that my sequel has a war that needs to kind of happen, and I may be able to fit a rebellion movement into that. I'm not sure if I will yet, but that kind of came up as a subplot. I know that my sequel has some unresolved relationships I need to address and develop. I know that my sequel has a new antagonist that I need to develop and defeat. I know that my sequel has an old antagonist that I need to tie up some loose ends with. And those are just 4 things that I know I need to address right off the bat, amongst a few other things that are just floating around in my brain. And so by getting clear on those things, I can kind of look at, okay, where do these fit into my outline, and how can I develop the gaps between these to make it all fit together. And so if you're trying to figure out an outline, start with those main plot points, and then figure out how the gaps get filled and how your characters go from A to B. And that's going to help you to figure out how your story has structure, right? And so you're basically just filling in the dots there. Okay, the third question is, what do you actually want to happen in your story? Because here's the thing that I see trip up writers all the time. We can come up with a great outline in our brain or on paper. It's really easy because we're writers, we can do that. And we can come up with something that makes logical sense. It seems to flow from start to finish. We think, yep, this looks like a great idea. And we sit down to write it and it bores us to death. And we just have no desire to write it. Has that ever happened to you? Raise your hand in the comments below. This is because what makes sense on paper may not be what you actually want to write about. You may think, okay, this would be a really interesting story if we do this rebellion thing and if we have this like subplot going on. But what you might really want to write about is a lot of romance. And so if you're not taking the time to put romance in there and have it be a driving force of what's driving you to write, then it's not going to be very exciting for you to write, and it's not going to be exciting for your reader to read. I know that one of the reasons I was able to write Ryan Rupert so quickly and have it flow from start to finish is because from the beginning, it was driven by the romance. Every single chapter, I was thinking about, okay, how are their relationships developing towards this romance, and when are they going to kiss, and does it make sense? And like all that stuff was going through my brain because that's what I wanted to write about, and that was part of the fun, was developing their relationship from a love-hate relationship to a romance, right? And so depending on what actually lights you up to write about, you want to be able to balance that with a structure that makes sense for your story. And that is actually where my storyteller sessions can be really helpful, because what I find when people jump on the phone with me is that they have a really great outline and they're stuck because they just get so bored writing it. And we kind of just figure out, okay, well, what do you actually want to write about, and how can we weave that in so it fits with what you've got? Or what can we take out so that you can actually write about something that you want? And so it's really great for us to kind of figure out and troubleshoot the story so that it's fun for you to write and it's fun for your readers to read. Because if it's not those things, it's just going to be an absolute nightmare chore that you don't want to do. And so that's the third question that you want to get clear on. Okay, number 4 is, what are the motives and challenges of my characters? This is a really great question, and it's similar to the first one, but you want to do this for all your characters and just figure out why are they in the story? What is their motive for taking part in the plot, for getting into relationships with people, or for causing trouble, or whatever they're doing? And, you know, what comes up as a conflict for them? What are their weaknesses? What gets in the way? What kind of obstacles are you going to introduce? Because if you get clear on that for every character from the beginning, then it's going to be really easy to weave that into the story so that it makes sense and it flows, right? Because if you're kind of just doing it as you go, I'm not saying you can't do it as you go, like a lot of pantsers do this and do really well, but let's say you got like halfway through and you realize like, oh, my character's actually this kind of person and probably wouldn't do that thing, or probably would do this thing, then you've got a lot of backtracking work to do to make a character that, like, 1, actually makes sense and is in alignment, but 2, is facing obstacles and having motivations that actually make sense for them, right? I'm trying to think of an example that I can give you here. I was trying to think of it from my recent book. If I think of one, I'll come back to it. But basically, like, let me think. Oh, yes, okay, great, I've got one. Okay, so basically, I had this, like, idea halfway through the book that maybe my main love interest, the one I just wrote, I'm talking about, my main love interest would be someone who, like, really cares about fish. Hopefully that's not a spoiler. But basically, he really cares about fish. He really is passionate about the fish. And his, let's call him friend, because otherwise it's a spoiler. His friend doesn't care about fish and will gladly eat fish and kill fish. And so, like, I was like, okay, well, how are they friends, right? Like, how do they actually get along? I had to figure that out halfway through, why it would make sense that these two people would be friends when they have such a clash of interest there. And so if I'd known that from the beginning, it would have been easier for me to go, okay, well, here's how I could navigate that, or here's why that just wouldn't make sense, and I should actually add some conflict in here to make it interesting. So that's a perfect example of what you could do to kind of like develop your conflicts and your character's desires, and kind of just like make sure it's all making sense from the beginning, because if you know that, you can outline the story better and you can figure out, okay, well, at this chapter, this is going to come to a head. They're going to have this argument about the freaking fish, and they're going to like battle about it because it just makes sense, right? Rather than just kind of skipping past it and going, well, I guess they just don't care and they're friends anyway. Like, you can kind of just navigate these things a bit better. So that is why you want to get clear on that, and it's going to really help you to just know what kind of obstacles you can introduce in the first place. So that's number 4. And then finally, number 5 is, what are the gaps that you need to fill? So I know we talked about that too, but if you haven't already figured that part out, now you sit down and you go, okay, I have my conflicts, I have my plots, and I have my characters, and I know what's going on. Now how do I get them through that process? How do I fill in my gaps? And so here are some more questions to help you kind of fill in the gaps, because this is probably the hardest part. It's just figuring out how to fill in these gaps without just adding fluff. So basically, what happens to develop relationships? What happens to guide your character through their journey? What realizations do they have along the way? What discoveries do they make? What mistakes do they make? Those are just some questions you can ask yourself to get really clear on this. And of course, if you need more help with that, that's something we can tackle in my storyteller session intensives, because the whole point is that I can ask you questions to help you get more clear, and that's going to really help you to be able to outline this better. So what I would recommend that you do is, if you are trying to develop your story outline, or you're trying to just get a better outline or clearer on your story, go ahead and answer these questions for yourself and see how clear you get. And then if you feel like you could really use more clarity and you really want some more help, then send me a message and let me know that you're interested in booking a storyteller session intensive, and we will chat about that and what it will look like, and we can kind of take it from there. What I'm going to do really quickly is just repeat those questions for you so that you have them, and then we'll wrap up. So the first question was, who is my main character and why? What needs to happen in my story? What do I want to happen in my story? What are the motives and challenges of my characters? And what gaps do I need to fill? Okay, those were the questions. I hope they help you. I hope you found this training helpful. And there's one more writing related training this week, and I can't wait to chat about that with you. I will see you guys in that training, and I'll speak to you then. Okay, bye.